I'd like to thank all of you for taking this time out on your Saturday morning to be with us for about an hour and a half of our first Conversation in Color, which is a series of discussions with scholars, writers, authors, film producers from around the country. And I could think of no better way to start off this first Conversation in Color than with our special guest, Dr. Ralph Slaughter, who is the worshipful Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Louisiana. I'd also like to have Stan, and Dr. Slaughter, I guess everyone knows you're the special guest since you're sitting right here. But I'd also like to acknowledge Keith Soigné, who is the District Deputy Grand Master here in New Orleans, and Vanetta Blasio, who is the District Deputy Grand Matron of the Eastern Star here in New Orleans. I see that I also have one of our board members here today from the Amistad, Andrea Jefferson, Dr. Andrea Jefferson. And we may have some other board members joining us later. And the staff of the Amistad Research Center. Could my staff please stand? These are the people and my board of directors who protect the history that is at the Amistad. For those of you who don't know, the Amistad Research Center is named after the slave ship which sailed from Cuba in 1839, and Sinkay, one of the African men on the ship, decided that he was going to sail that ship home. So there was a revolt on that ship, a mutiny on that ship. Well, they ended up being brought back to America, and it ended up being a Supreme Court case to free those 59 men and people on that ship. The AMA, American Missionary Association, ended up hiring the abolitionist attorneys who defended those people so that they would have their freedom. When you see the Amistad's logo, when you go on the website and you see the logo which is represented by that ship, or when you see that logo anywhere around, which I hope you will be seeing in the airport and on billboards and at bus stops and in classrooms and everywhere that we can be, to educate people about the history, not only the history of the Amistad and its venture for freedom, but about the history of the people who have been unrepresented in minority communities all over the world and their fight for liberation. The Amistad is located in the Uptown New Orleans campus at Tulane University. It is the nation's preeminent source of historical records chronicling the rich cultural background of minority groups in the United States. The mission of the Amistad is to collect, preserve, and provide open access to original materials that reference the social and cultural importance of America's complex ethnic and racial history. With collections ranging from personal and family papers of politicians, artists, writers, laborers, educators, and organizations, there is no story in America that the Amistad can't tell. Our motto for this year is truth be told from the stacks of the Amistad. We have 900 plus collections there. Any one collection could contain 400 boxes of material. We have 15 pages of original manuscripts and documents. So we want the children to know, the young people to know, the future researchers and teachers and film producers who come, like the ones who come to us today, we want them to know that you don't just Google something when you want to find out information about anything. But I can guarantee you, if anyone in this world Googles something or goes to Wikipedia and they see the Amistad's name on it, I can guarantee you that it was my staff that researched the original documents so that the truth would be told in those primary source documents that we protect at the Amistad. So without any further ado, I would like to thank the Grand Lodges of Louisiana of the Prince Hall Masons and Dr. Slaughter, because I understand that we may end up eventually with over 400 boxes of material from the lodges around the state of Louisiana. We are waiting to hear the results of a grant that we submitted to the National Archives for the processing of those documents. So it's my staff's responsibility to make sure that those dusty documents get cleaned in the proper fashion as archivists do, and that hopefully we will be able to digitize these records so they will be available for future generations. And I'm hoping that one day there might be a feature film on Richard Allen, feature film, not just a documentary. Documentaries are good, but also John G. Lewis, and I hope that the story of the work that your brothers and sisters have done to contribute to the civil rights movement and our struggle for freedom in America, I hope that it will be documented on film for future generations. So now I will join you over at the table, and I won't talk so much, even though this is supposed to be a conversation. I will start off by asking you to tell us how the Prince Hall Masons started and how many lodges in Louisiana are there, and give us a little background just on the Prince Hall Masons in general.
Test, test. I'm about to hijack her show because I can't sit down here for 1 hour. By nature, I like to move around. So I'm going to move around. Sometimes might get too close to you. But for 1 hour, my attention won't let me sit there that long. But before I do anything, I want to acknowledge and thank my wife for traveling with me, Denise Slaughter. I know she's in here somewhere. Okay, she went in the back. But y'all can tell I call her name. She's traveled with me up and down the roads of Louisiana and around the country for over more than 25 years. And she would drive me on those Sundays. We do cornerstone sometime in the cities, sometime back in the back roads in the country. And she's been out there so long with me, she knows the ceremony better than I do. I want to also take a pause and acknowledge the person who actually brought me to the Amistad, Dr. Andrea Jefferson. She's been on the board a long time, and we were at Southern University, and she introduced me to the Amistad, which led me to do my own research, homework, and decide that was a good place to have our stuff. And I want to also, they say you have to give people their flowers while they live in. Congressman William Jefferson, who Prince Hall Mason been in his family a long, long time, and it's been a long time since I've seen you, but it's good to see you. He's from Lake Providence. My wife's family from Lake Providence, so you run across people, the world is small. I could sit down and we could actually have a conversation. My problem with what I want to try to do is I started thinking about how much could we cover within the time frame here. Yeah, I call you, they know I call your name, so. I learned a long time ago to do that first, because a lot of people get to the program and they planning on doing it on the back end, and you always forget on the back end. Get that over with, keep on going. And so there's so much history of this organization within the time frame, and I was trying to figure out how did I get all this out in the time allotted without keeping you here all day. I wrote some notes of things I wanted to make sure I covered. So if you see me look at them, that means I had to refresh myself. Prince Hall Masonry started in America, 1775. How many years ago was that? More than 200, right? In Boston, Massachusetts. Prince Hall and 14 others joined the lodge March of 1775. And that was the beginning of how it got started. How did it end up in Louisiana? Well, through other states. So Prince Hall, in 1775, he and others were actually involved in the Revolutionary War in shaping this place we call America. They went from 14 members to what later became hundreds of thousands of members throughout the United States and throughout the world. Because we have members now in all of the states, but also in most of the other countries around the world. And our fastest growing place now is Africa. I was talking with one of the Grand Masters in Africa. He says there's over 8 billion men in Africa. And he saw that as the next frontier for Prince Hall Masonry. So I'm going to back up a little bit and look at my cheat sheet, because there's some things on there I want to make sure that I make you aware of the organization, because there are things that most people never know about our organization. They see large halls in and around the state, in the cities, sometime in the backwoods of the country. And there's always this nomenclature that, well, that's a secret organization. The organization has never been a secret organization. We have some secrets in our rituals among ourselves, but there was a lot of community work going on and still goes on in those buildings. Starting back in 1775, because they were the premier on fighting for the rights, particularly of people of color. Started with Prince Hall and his group in Boston. They moved on to Pennsylvania, and it was there in Pennsylvania that they met Absalom Jones and Richard Allen in the work of the Masons, and the church became one. As early as 1776, because the first lodge was in Boston. The second lodge was in Philadelphia. The third lodge was in Rhode Island. And it continued to spread. So I'm gonna open up these notes. There was a time where I could remember all this off the top of my head. I don't even try that anymore. So I'm going to refresh them. I'm going to go on over here. You can jump in whenever you get ready, but I thought about that this morning. I said, let me do something a little bit different. Let me hit these notes. So I wrote down here, Prince Hall was the father of black masonry in the U.S. He and 14 others were initiated actually in an Irish lodge in Boston, 1775. In March 2nd, 1784, Prince Hall petitioned the Grand Lodge of England for a charter. It took a while for that charter to come, but that charter came. They were granted a warrant to start African Lodge 459 on September the 29th, 1784. It was delivered 3 years later by Captain James Scott, who was the brother-in-law of John Hancock. Y'all remember John Hancock? It then expanded to Pennsylvania, where he met Absalom John, who was an ordained Episcopal priest and a Mason. And they established African Lodge 459 of Philadelphia, March 22nd, 1797, excuse me. Hiram Lodge number 3 in Providence, Rhode Island, 1787. And then they established the Grand Lodge in 1808. Absalom John and Richard Allen, the founder of the first bishop of the AME Church, started that lodge in Pennsylvania. But here's what's interesting. They also organized, this was a note I wanted to put here, the Free African Society and the Free African Society movement, which provided for the establishment of schools for the education of free black children in 1787. Can you imagine that in that time frame? Can you imagine what 1787 must have looked like? In 1815, they established a Grand Lodge in Pennsylvania. Ironically, and this will help show how the relationship between Prince Hall Masonry and the AME Church moved into Louisiana. Because in Pennsylvania was Reverend Thomas W. Stringer. He was the one responsible for expanding Masonry south and west of Philadelphia. From Pennsylvania, the following states started lodges and Grand Lodges. Maryland, 1846. District of Columbia, 1848. New Jersey, 1848. Ohio, 1849. Delaware, 1849. Virginia, 1866. And out of that, Pennsylvania put lodges in California, Georgia, and Louisiana. So Stringer was AME preacher. He was on the circuit. He was assigned the Indiana district, which meant he covered everything from Indiana all down the Mississippi River. That's how people got around by transportation. During that time, you either traveling by horseback or boats up and down the river. And so Stringer eventually ended up in Ohio. But before he ended up in Ohio, his circuit brought him to New Orleans. And he was preaching right down here in New Orleans in this very St. James AME church. And when he got here, there were Masons who were Prince Hall Masons. They wasn't called Prince Hall Masons at the time. They were people of color Masons who belonged here. And they encouraged him to set up a lodge in New Orleans. The irony was most of the founding members of Masonry in Louisiana for people of color were members of this church. In our history, there's a copy of the incorporation papers of St. James Church. And the names of most of the people on that piece of paper were Prince Hall Masons. And I could read them all off to you, but all that would take a lot of time. We would be here, so I'm going to try to hit the highlights of all this. How much time am I supposed to have? I don't want to run over, but I'm going to. So I'm trying to hurry up and bring this thing from the 1849s. And so he gave him a lodge. That lodge in Louisiana, that first lodge was called Richmond Lodge. And today, this year, we are celebrating 175 years of Prince Hall Masonry being in Louisiana through Richmond Lodge. Give them a round of applause. That's a long time for an organization to be in business, operating, and never losing its steam. I can only imagine what 1869 must have been looking like, or 1863. Any of those times, what it must have looked like. It's a struggle right now to think about what it is today. Because in Louisiana, right? Now, all of these people were free men of color. But there were also a lot of slaves in Louisiana, right? But just like in Pennsylvania, the Prince Hall Masons decided to bond together and start schools for children of color back then. Thomas Stringer, as he went up and down the river, eventually went from Pennsylvania. He became the first Grand Master of the Ohio Grand Lodge. When he got to become the Grand Master of Ohio, he recommended to the brothers of Richmond Lodge, who were under the then Pennsylvania Grand Lodge, to join Ohio with him. They did that. They started 3 lodges in Ohio. The first lodge outside of Ohio became Richmond number 4 on the Ohio Registry. 2 other lodges eventually came under his leadership in Louisiana. Richmond, Stringer number 11, I wrote these dates down, and Parson. Stringer 11, 1854, Parson number 18, 1857. And so Ohio started lodges in Alabama, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, Tennessee, and West Virginia. That's a lot of states at such an early age. They eventually made their way out west, and before you knew it, there were lodges all over. In this church, there's stained glass. Some of the glasses up here were purchased by the Grand Lodge. I'm looking at one right here, that one in the middle, where it says Eureka Grand Lodge. E.A. Williams. E.A. Williams, I think, was the 7th Grand Master of Louisiana, the 4th Grand Master. I got to look him up. But anyway, that is a stained wonder that they put up there, Eureka Grand Lodge. E.A. Williams. That showed the relationship between the church and the order. And they moved all of that from not only the church to educating the children of the community, but they became political because it was necessary of the time that they be involved in the politics of it. Even back then, not only did they have the largest, but Eastern Star Chapter sprang up. Brothers and sisters working together. 1863, those three lodges started Eureka Grand Lodge. That was the name. 1863. They met on Clinton Street between Custom House and Bienville Street, just to give you an idea of where they were. John Parson, who was a member of this church, became its first Grand Master. Jordan Noble, who was a member of this church, became the Grand Junior Warden. James Berry, who was a member of this church, was Deputy Grand Master. In December of 1863, they held another election. Lewis Banks was elected Grand Master. Again, a member of this church. He was involved in the National Equal Rights League, modern day NAACP. Another fellow by the name of Jacob Norega. His name is on the charter of this church and the incorporation papers. Oscar J. Dunn. Remember now, all this was at the height of the Civil War. Can you imagine what was going on? The height of the Civil War. There were federal troops in New Orleans, but also at that time, black men were seized and put to work, just walking up and down the street. Others were arrested because they didn't have their papers showing that they were free. 1864, in terms of this political effort we're talking about, Oscar James Dunn was elected as the third Grand Master of Eureka Grand Lodge. By 1870, he would also be Lieutenant Governor. How about that for being politically active? Okay. While he was the Lieutenant Governor, just like they got the incorporation done for St. James Church, he got the incorporation done for the Grand Lodge. And so our Grand Lodge was not established by some paper file with the Secretary of State. I have the original document with the handwriting at that time of the bill that was passed to establish the Grand Lodge by an act of the Louisiana legislature signed by the governor at that time, Oscar J. Dunn, who would have been the president of the Senate and lieutenant governor, and by the Speaker of the House. That's one of those documents I need to put in the Amistad. That's a document I had in the office, but I brought it home so I could look at it from time to time. So I need to take it out of my storage closet that I have and make sure I have the document so it can be preserved forever. In 1878, the federal troops were removed from Louisiana. Now that brought some turmoil, didn't it? Because the troops kept peace in order. When they left, all kind of stuff started happening. People started getting detained in the country of, out in the, let me not use the word country, I don't want to use that in the wrong term. In the non-urban areas, the rural areas of the state, the Klan was rapid all over. So can you imagine during that time the Grand Master riding around Louisiana in a horse and buggy, going to the meetings, how dangerous that was. But they continued to grow lodges not only in the cities, but they started lodges, if you look at the book, in many of these small villages around the state. There were lodges. That's how they began to organize. And they provided defense for themselves. So in them lodge halls, they were providing defense for themselves as well as plans on how to improve life for them and their families. That still go on today to make sure we accomplish those same things. So E.A. Williams, whose name is up there, served as Grand Master from 1891 to 1893. In the history of our Grand Lodge, there have been 13 Grand Masters. In the history of our Grand Chapter, since they reorganized in 1938, there have been, I think, 4 Grand Matrons. But we work together. Minerva G. Minor, Mary McGrath Bell, Esther Lee Meadows, and Elvira Shannon. Those are the 4 Grand Matrons that have been there since Esther Grand Chapter was organized in January 12, 1938. So the organization has had strong leadership, but the brothers and sisters of this state decided that wasn't enough. So in the 60s, they bought a camp, almost 150 acres in the center of the state, and put in a corporation called the Prince Hall Youth Fund, where kids who are in the city and other places who've never seen grass can go out there. There's a swimming pool. And so it became a part of the mission early to try to do what we could to try to help our children. And we started a program called Masons as Mentors, because young men need to see men that look like them, to have an understanding of what it's like. It's some things, it's good to have a mama, but it's some things a mama can't teach a young man. He needs a male figure. He needs a man. And so even today, we try to fulfill that role. We have groups around the state that go into these prisons to try to rehabilitate them and to try to work with them, a lot of at-risk youth, before they can ever get there, to cut them off. That task is harder and harder now because, you know, these young men today, they all got guns. But we keep trying. We keep trying. Masonry grew from 1863 when they had the Grand Lodge. 1879, the next lodge was in Baton Rouge. But again, as I said, I can only emphasize to you how treacherous that had to be, traveling as the Grand Master from that time, from New Orleans to Lake Charles, to Lafayette, to Alexandria. I'm giving you the name of the cities, but just think about them little old country villages surrounding them, trying to stay protected, because it was difficult. If you read the history of our Grand Lodge, we realize some of our brothers were killed, some of them were lynched. Time was treacherous. But I'm reading a paper today where they propose modern day lynching. Because most of the people that's going to execute it going to look like me. Our organization, our members Some of you going to remember these. People like J.K. Haynes, who started the Louisiana Education Association. Our members play a role in the NAACP. A lot of community organizations. You go right here in New Orleans, the Zulu Social and Pleasure Club, you go in there, probably at least 50% of those brothers are our members. We are embedded everywhere because we have a long history of doing community service, trying to help our people, trying to help our community. I'm giving you a lot of stuff, but I'm moving through it fast. I'm probably at the point of eating up my time, so I'm going to depend on my time clock here. I told I was going to try to carry most of this load because there's so much information. More significantly, in 1950, the Conference of Grand Masters, which is all the Grand Masters as a conference, and the NAACP entered into a pact with Thurgood Marshall. Y'all remember him? Before he was a judge and the Supreme Court justice, he was the attorney for the NAACP. Very few people know that the Conference of Grand Masters got with the NAACP, and they put up the money for what was called the Prince Hall Legal Defense Fund. And Thurgood Marshall made a report to the Conference of Grand Masters every year starting 1950 until the time he went on the bench. And I'm going to share part of one of those reports with you so you can have an appreciation from his perspective in terms of what he thought Prince Hall Masonry meant to the fight in America, because during that time, the issue was what? Public accommodation, public transportation, housing. Those issues all had to be litigated. A lot of those cases started right here in New Orleans. Dred Scott, right? Most of those attorneys involved were affiliated with the organization. The organization funded most of those litigations. We didn't just talk the talk. It was paid for using our funds too. Prince Hall Masonry family, on both the men and women's side, was the front runners for the modern day D9. You look at the sororities, they are there because the Masonic family paid the price. There was even litigation that had to go to the United Supreme Court. Out of that case, the Supreme Court said that the Prince Hall family had a right to practice masonry, Scottish Rite Masonry, York Rite Masonry, enshrined them. That paved the way for the sororities and fraternities to come about. Whether it's any of those D9s are here because of the price that was paid. Long before there were D9s, because they all came after this. But they were able to be there because the Masonic family went to the Supreme Court. It took them almost 9 years to get that case decided, but it was a unanimous case that we had the right to do it because all of the white lodges challenged the right of people of color to have lodges, to have shrine temples, to have Scottish Rite consistence. But that case paved the way. And so the D9s are flourishing as a result of it, and most of our members still belong and participate in all those organizations. What I find fascinating, how am I doing on time? How am I doing on my time, huh? Okay. Was that our time we supposed to have? Let me hurry up then. As the priest would say, as I close. So one of the most fascinating things that I found is that as these organizations grew in little places, I can give you names that you don't even recognize in Louisiana, they always bought property. And what's fascinating about this, some of the lodges that got started in the 1800s, some of them ceased to exist during the early 1900s because of the Depression. But we are still finding properties in their name. Just last year, we found a 1 acre up in Bossier Parish in the middle of an area where a family had been cutting timber. And they were trying to use eminent domain to say that they had been cutting it for more than 60 years, because that's what the law said, more than 10 years. But we were able to go to court and defend that 1 acre land, and we eventually got them to settle, and we sold it to them because it was landlocked. We had no way of getting it to it, but we got the benefit of it being there. Now the legislature has changed the law now where nonprofits have to renew, because all that property was tax exempt. You now have to put in applications. And so we are quickly trying to find all of our properties to put an address on them so that we don't end up with a bill where they had to cut the grass or some other reason where they put it up for sheriff's sale. So as I hastily race to the end of this, again, we talked about Jim Crow being prevalent. 1901, John G. Lewis Sr. was elected the Grand Master. The Lewis family was a dynasty in Prince Hall Mason because John G. Lewis Sr. and his son Scott Lewis and John G. Lewis Jr., they served as Grand Master for over 70 years. That's a long time. Names: O.J. Dunn, P.B.S. Pinchback, C.C. Antoine. All those people were leaders, but not only were they leaders, they owned businesses, funeral homes, insurance. That's where the money came to do some of this. We had congressmen, legislators, mayors, governors, people that went publishing. John Johnson, Ben Hooks, who was over the NAACP. He later became the Grand Master of Tennessee. Felton Clark at Southern University, Ralph Waldo Emerson Jones at Grambling. Many school board members, many police jurors, army generals. In Louisiana, the Lewises started a printing press, which was a way to generate money. And they had their own publication for the Grand Lodge called the Plumb Line. Most of those issues are in the Amistad, and they've got a tremendous collection. So let me use the couple minutes I have. I want to share this with you. This is a report to the Conference of Grand Masters from the Prince Hall Legal Research Department. This report is presented by Thurgood Marshall, the director and counsel. It's dated May 22nd, 1956. And he says, this report not only summarizes the major accomplishments of the department for the past 12 years, but it's an overview of the 5-year period. Of equal importance, it describes the nature of many important problems with which the department is concerned and what has been accomplished with respect to some of them. Moreover, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund hopes that this report serves as a measure of all American indebtedness to Prince Hall Masons for their general support to this department. That's a pretty significant open. I will skip through this, but he says it is much clearer now that 5 years when the Prince Hall Masons Legal Research Department was established that the Legal Defense Fund and Educational Fund must play a more effective role in a great and determined push forward for full equality. That role is only partially legal and only partially related to education. It may best described as social engineering. Yet the magnitude of it is such that the aid of the Prince Hall Mason Legal Research Department will become increasingly indispensable in the development of an adequate solution of its legal and human ramifications. Moreover, in the last 5 years, a revolution has occurred in civil rights litigation. In much of it, it calls for research in other fields of law, such as contracts, corporation, torts. The legal defense will be able to meet demands only to the extent that the legal research department is continuing. Exploration and cooperation rather than direction are the watchwords of the department. One example is that the constant effort to coordinate local activities with our legal programs. This is usually accomplished by protecting facts regarding a local situation. He cites here in his last paragraph, it's ironic that this paragraph would apply to Louisiana. Let me skip to it. These reports, if I have not turned them over to the Amistad, I will. I'm going to skip these pages. I find this piece where you're talking about. To many people, the following types of work is done by the Prince Hall Mason Fund: the scope of judgment in a spurless class action, federal removal jurisdiction, the community approach toward desegregation, teacher security laws, defense, and libel action. But to the lawyer, these memorandums are more 100 times other, have a reassuring meaning. However significant these accomplishments are today, or may prove to be tomorrow, they have been done on a modest budget, especially in view of the fact, this is what was striking, that the state of Louisiana, just one state, has allocated $100,000. They've set it aside for legal research and planning directed at preserving desegregation. My state. As expressed in more detail, as presented in the financial statements, the contributions totaling $21,000 for the calendar year 1955 has gone a long way to cover the expenses. Rather than devote all its exclusive to research associated with the current litigation and implementation projects, experimental and field activity designed to effectively provide remedial procedures. And attached to this is a financial report. And in this financial report, it shows a 5-year. This is what I was proud of. From 1951 to 1956, the total amount of money that was put up by the various grand lodges to this fund was $90,000. Can you imagine what $90,000 must have been like in those terms? Because back then bread was, what, 50 cents? But even more impressive was, as I look at the state-by-state breakdown of the donations, California did $3,000, Illinois gave $3,000, California, I said $3,400, Massachusetts, $1,000. When I look down here and I see Georgia gave $20,500, the state with the highest contribution was Louisiana with a total of $24,000. As then, as now, we are issuing to our members a new call, because America, particularly these southern states, we are moving in a reverse action. We don't endorse candidates because the IRS say we can't. But there's nothing stopping us from telling people they need to make sure they vote. And we are seeing the effects of not voting in America and in Louisiana. The people who didn't think that they were going to have to pay the price are doing what? We already see we're going to be paying the price. All right. But our organization will remain steadfast to do what we can to make sure that we continue to provide education, that we continue to give money to support the causes of legal defense funds. As we continue to grow the organization, continue to grow. The blessing has been members can join our organization at 18. And we're getting a lot of young men throughout our state. But there's a lot of work to be done. All right. I'm probably 2 minutes old. Ordinarily, I would sit down and say, are there questions? But I'll have to stay afterward for doing that. All right. Hopefully, I covered it,
Yes.
as much you wanted me to cover.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Slaughter. So I want to ask you, because I was at your lodge in Baton Rouge, and you mentioned to me the Masons' involvement in the Baton Rouge bus boycott.
Right.
Can you please let the people here know what was the significance of the Baton Rouge bus boycott, and what did the Masons do to contribute to that?
If you give me time, I'm going to cover that. I had a note on that, but I said I'm running out of time. But so very few people know that the original bus boycott was in Baton Rouge. Reverend T.J. Jemison, who was a Prince Hall Mason, he was the pastor of Mount Zion First Baptist Church. They got together. Little known fact is that John G. Lewis, Jr., Grand Master, was the treasurer of Mount Zion. And he helped put the funding together for the bus boycott. They brought Dr. King here and taught him how to do the Montgomery bus boycott. John G. Lewis provided Masonic security. Y'all know what I mean? The brothers know what I mean. Okay? We protect our own. And so that was an important piece of history that is known in Baton Rouge, that it was the first bus boycott. There are documented pictures of Martin Luther King being here in Baton Rouge, learning how to do that with Reverend Jemison and John G. Lewis. It was a Prince Hall Mason, R.D. Nesbitt, who told me how he got Martin Luther King to become pastor of his church in Montgomery, Dexter Avenue Church in Montgomery, R.D. Nesbitt. His office was in the Grand Lodge building in Atlanta, Georgia. So there's a lot of correlation, but that's significant. Thank you for that reminder. But it shows you what can be done when we apply ourselves.
You mentioned a lot. I heard one thing that stood out in my mind as I listened to you. You called out the names of treasurers in the organization. The treasurer is the person responsible who has the fiduciary responsibility of the organization. That was a lot of money back then. I heard you say C.C. Antoine, PBS Pinchback, and Oscar Dunn. Were all three of those men legislators during Reconstruction?
Yes.
Members of this church?
Oscar J. Dunn was, I don't know if Pinchback was, I have to look him up. C.C. Antoine ended up at some point up in Shreveport. Okay. Yeah.
The other thing in talking about the financial responsibility, I want to point out that while I was working at the West Baton Rouge Museum, I was doing some research on C.C. Antoine. He was the state treasurer during Reconstruction. He was the state treasurer for 15 years. And I remember reading an article in the Times-Picayune that said he was the best treasurer and kept the best financial records for the state of Louisiana up until that time. Again, I don't know why we don't hear more about men in our community historically on the national level and the state level, but that's why the Amistad exists. so that we hold the records for documentary film producers, the press and the media, to come and do research, authors, biographers come and do research with us, because remember, I think we agree that truth be told, everything you said and you taught us today is backed up by the documentation that is in the records that the Masons kept and that the Masons keep, and the Eastern Star. I mean, whoever operates or runs or thinks about starting an organization, you are the organizational model for success and excellence.
I'll be honest with you. When I first became Grandmaster, I was blown away that they had the original 1863 minutes. They sent them out to a company and had them printed and made sure they were in more than one place. I can get a copy tomorrow from the Grand Lodge of Iowa. 1863 minutes. As you look through the pictures, so here's the other significance. Most of the publications back then do not include pictures. You know why? They were expensive. We want to go back and do a rewrite on the history because we have pictures going back into the 1800s. And pictures tell a different kind of story. We did our call to put our brothers on notice for our session this year, and on the front of the call, we put a picture of a meeting from the 1923 Grand Lodge. There are pictures that go into the 1800s of large meetings, of large buildings. The pictures tell a different kind of story. And we want to tell that because, as I said, we visual people. We like to see stuff. So, but I thank the Amistad for preserving these records, because many of these records, because they are so old, they are brittle. But we have, even on Basin Street, membership records going way back then. We want to make sure we give those to Amistad so that they can be preserved. And people can come along to see what happened, you know. So 1863 is, actually our oldest lodge is older than the Grand Lodge, Richmond, 175 years. That's a long time. But all that history is documented. That's what's amazing. And when you look at the correspondence and the handwriting, I will confess to you the computer has messed me up, because I now print. I used to, in school, could write cursive, but the computer has messed me up. I now print. But if you see those letters written by, there was a letter I saw from Thomas Stringer that he wrote in 1890 with what looks like calligraphy. Everybody wrote like that. All the documents are written like that. And it's a tremendous story that they tell. We don't communicate with each other like that now. We send texts.
Yes, and I also want to say thank you to your organization, because not only did you give the Amistad the documents, the rare papers, but you also made a financial contribution twice. So, you know, it's one thing to say we're going to give this to you for you to do the work, but it takes money, it takes funding, and we wear ourselves thin. My staff and I wear ourselves thin asking the federal government for money to support Black history. So I think we're almost in a new civil rights era.
We are.
If the government says, if the government is telling us that they are no longer going to support and are trying to stop us from teaching our children Black history, it's going to be left up to us to teach our children.
Amen.
Are we the only people who ask for permission to teach our children our history? I posed that question to you. So I want to say thank you to the Louisiana Prince Hall Masons because you put your money where your mouth is. I have one more question before we maybe open the floor for some questions for about 10 minutes. And if this is a part of your ritual that you can't tell us today, I'll accept that.
Ask your question.
I see swords everywhere. And when I look at the cover of the books and pamphlets, when I was in the lodge, I saw swords. I understand the philosophy that your men were and are fearless and courageous. Do the swords have anything to do with that?
So if you go back even into biblical times, they used swords. They were an instrument of protection. They still are today. They symbolize the protection that we provide to our members and their families.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions from the audience? We can pass the mic. Anyone have any questions for Dr. Slaughter?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Dr. Slaughter. I'm Roseanne Adderley, and I'm actually on the board of the Amistad Research Center. And Dr. Slaughter, you don't know this, and Kathy does not know this. This is one of my long-held dreams, because I've always thought I know as a historian in the background how important Prince Hall Masons have been in Black civil rights struggle, and no one ever, it is rare that we talk about it. And so this is a great day for Amistad. The question, though, that I had for you, because I did look into it when I heard that this was coming, is I wonder what you could say about what the kind of national record-keeping practices of the Prince Hall Masons are, because I've always thought of the Amistad as a natural partner to Masonic organizations in this record-keeping practice as an African-American archive, not just for Louisiana, but for Black struggle and history over these critical years. And I just don't know anything about, because I think about the records you describe and think about all the places around the country that they're probably similar records, and I'm wondering what you know about kind of record-keeping practices and ways that we could sort of have this partnership even grow.
So one of the things that I know for sure, and we have turned a significant portion of those to Amistad. The Grand Lodges, particularly in the earlier days, shared their minutes with each other. We have minutes, we have a lot of records from the Grand Lodge of Maryland, and actually all of the Grand Lodges at one time shared their records with everybody. Unfortunately for a lot of Grand Lodges, their records got lost because the place burned down, or they got waterlogged, or the papers just were fragile and people didn't have a way of maintaining. We have a lot of records that are reaching that point. But all of the Grand Lodges and Grand Chapters keep minutes of their meetings and things that took place. We also have pictures. A lot of them have pictures. And so they are there, and we have a conference where we share information. And so all of the organizations that I'm aware of kept minutes, and they should all have them. Louisiana did a much better job of it because of the leadership. Somebody had the bright idea, let's preserve this in such a fashion. All of our minutes from 1863 on are kept in a fireproof safe. At least one set, maybe two sets. But then there are other places. But each lodge has their own set of records. What we're trying to do is have all of those records delivered to the Amistad, because it's so important to be able to preserve it and get it digitized. When we first turned this collection over, Amistad was getting calls from all over the country because John G. Lewis Sr. had some significant government positions. They were tracking, I think he came out of Nova Scotia, and so a lot of people was interested in those records. And so I'm not sure where we're at in terms of identify them. I'm not even sure if you all been able to go through the last 20 boxes we gave you, but we have more whenever you all are ready to turn over. Okay.
I know that from the 1980s until the present day, establishing mutual recognition has been a big effort between the mainstream, aka white Grand Lodges, and the Prince Hall Grand Lodges. And there are about 5 states that are the outliers, and Louisiana is one of them. I know that they've seen fit to establish recognition with the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Maryland, but why is it that the mainstream Grand Lodge and the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Louisiana are not in mutual recognition and amity?
So I know most of their leadership. So I'm gonna answer that question in the manner in which you asked. I'm gonna give you a straight up answer. As some of them said, they're gonna have to have some hearse wheels to roll before Louisiana will ever be ready for that. You know, Louisiana and we still in the heart of the Confederacy. And so it comes up every year, but it is not something that we are actively pursuing, because what has happened in a lot of those states where they got that recognition going, what happens is they are losing members right and left. And so they see the Prince Hall Mason just another place where they can pick up members. Because they go into these meetings and then these great big old buildings that they can't hardly pay for anymore. And so our people fall victim for it, like, well, I want to join over here. And so I know them. We've been talking for a long, long time. But every time they bring that vote out, particularly those rural members will shoot that down. And it's not something we pursue. We like keeping the relationship up and the conversations going on. But we're not looking for something that would lead to the mergers of the organizations, which is happening in some of these places. All right. Good question. But yes, ma'am. Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, in closing, again, I want to thank everyone for coming and spending your Saturday with us. Go to www.amistadresearchcenter.org. Encourage your children to learn how to do research and use primary source documents so that they will be ready to explore these records as our grants come through and the funding comes through to make them more accessible for the public. Also, don't forget to teach your children how to write in cursive. Okay, remember what I said about what the schools don't teach them? We have to teach them at home. Do you realize that children today cannot read a letter that their grandmother wrote? They can't read a postcard that a grandmother may have written in cursive writing. So I would like to encourage those of you who are grandparents, at least teach them how to write their name and sign their name in cursive. Because they too may become the future curators and conservators and archivists that we will need to hire as we translate these documents. And it's like translating calligraphy, and it's like translating in a foreign language English, plain and simple English, because they can't read and write in cursive. I would like to acknowledge Jari Honore from the Historic New Orleans Collection. I believe they have an exhibit there on that includes the Freemasons. And when does that exhibit end? Till May 10th. So the Historic New Orleans Collection, please go and see those artifacts. Jari is in my opinion, the #1 historian in the state of Louisiana. And the #1 genealogist, African-American genealogist, but genealogist in the state of Louisiana. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Robert Perry, who provided the music as you came in. Dr. Perry is the great-grand-nephew of Pierre Callis Landry, who was America's first elected black mayor of Donaldsonville in 1868. And I believe your grand cousin, it would have been, great grand cousin would have been L.B. Landry, right? Yes. Lord Beaconsfield Landry. And when I first did research, my first day of research before I opened the River Road African American Museum 30 years ago was at the Amistad Research Center when I met Elise Kane, who was the membership director, and she said, I didn't know anything about history if I didn't know who Pierre Landry was. And she shared the Dunn Landry papers with me from your family that are part of our repository. So thank you, sir. Thank you for your family's support. And last but not least, I want to respectfully acknowledge the pastor of this historic St. James AME Church, Dr. Demetrius Phillips. Sir, would you like to come and say a few closing words to everybody or welcome everyone to your church?
Certainly, we are proud and happy to have you all here today as we explore history, and it is extremely happy for us to be a part of that history in such a profound way. And anything that we can do, just let us know. Happy to say that I too am a part of the Prince Hall Basin family. Continue that tradition. Also, I would like for Dr. Slaughter, if he can, during the Hurricane Katrina, we lost a great deal of our documents, a great deal of documents. And I heard you say that you have the charter for the church, copy of it of some sort. We would certainly like if you could share that with us so that we can make it a part of our archives here as well. All right, God bless you.
We appreciate your affording us the opportunity. We originally talked about doing this at Amistad, and I said, we're going to outgrow that place, so let's go with the historic St. James. So in keeping with our custom and tradition, we're going to also give the church a donation for opening these doors for us to participate in.
And I want to say that this historic place is a perfect place for maybe some future conversations in color. So we may be calling on you in the future. For those of you who would like to learn more about the history of this church, we have Mr. Alvin Jackson from the New Orleans Jazz Museum. And so he's going to stay and for a few minutes give you a tour, a talk about the history of this church and its significance. So for those of you who would like to leave now, you can. If you would like to stay, Mr. Jackson, would you like to just tell them a few things about the history of the church for those who would like to stay?
Thank you. Well, Dr. Slaughter hasn't mentioned, there's not much more to say. He's kind of said it all. But I would like to call the attention of the attendees. Too close for comfort.
No, this one's out. We'll try this one.
Of the military, can you all hear me? Of the military history associated with this church. We could really go back to 1815, but I'd rather go back to 1803 in terms of people who came in and out of this church. And if perchance you're ever in a Tremé neighborhood and you happen to pop in to Armstrong Park to check out Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet and those folk, I would ask you to go to the side of St. Philip Street. There you will see Perseverance Lodge number 4. The first lodge in this state. I'm not trying to one-up Prince Hall Mason because I'm a member of the Star of Bethlehem, so I do respect that. But it's important to know that after the Haitian Revolution, Masons migrated to New Orleans, and that's where that lodge came from. They were Scottish Rites and integrated, and that caused all kind of hell, so thank God for Prince Hall. Got it? This is real. Military and Prince Hall Masons are closely associated. Those guys mentioned by Dr. Slaughter, one and the same. I'd like to focus on the very last stained glass all the way in the back, if you guys don't mind. The very last one You see the initials G-A-R. Yes, ma'am. Grand Army of the Republic, Civil War Brethren, Louisiana Native Guard, and Jerry, bear me out, he's keeping me honest, came out of this church. One of the most, to me, important guys who was a member of the Louisiana Native Guard happened to have been Andrew Jackson's drummer boy in 1815. His name was Jordan Bankston Noble. And I wrote a book on his life. And today, Judge Regina Woods is his third great-granddaughter. There is so much of our history that needs to be discussed that we have not discussed. Jordan Bankston Noble became the only person of African ancestry who was inducted, to my knowledge, into the Joseph Milepost of the Grand Army of the Republic, which is a predominantly, except for Jordan Bankston Noble, white lodge. And those documents are on Tulane University's campus. This was in 1867, somewhere thereabouts. Of course, he and Oscar Dunn were good friends. And for those of you who are not familiar with Custom House, anybody knows what Custom House Street was? It's outside. Today it's known as Iberville or Iberville. And Dunn lived on a corner on Custom House in Durbany. And after he married, he moved to Canal Street. And those of you who are my age and a little bit younger, not older, might remember Canal Street, where there once was a meal a minute restaurant. That very same corner is where Dunn's house as lieutenant governor is where he lived. Demolished, and then we get a meal a minute out of it. We have a lot of history. I'm not saying my days are numbered, but Jerry is younger than I am, but we need some young blood to pick up this torch to keep it going. Because if we don't do it, they have demonstrated legislatively, we'll stop it from happening. I just want to thank you guys for coming. You're welcome to come back to our church, please. And thank you again. Thank you, Ms. Hambrick, Reverend Dr. Slaughter, Pastor Phillips, Brother Swan, Swanye. Swanye, la même chose.
One question. When was this church built?
This church is built after Wesley Methodists kind of embarrassed black folk again by refusing to allow them to take communion at the altar. They abandoned the church and bought a building on Bienville off of Claiborne, which was St. James Chapel. Later on, during the 1846, 48-ish areas, when they began the construction of this church. And Senator Royce Duplessis, some of you may know that name, his great-great-grand used to use her apron to carry the bricks to brick these walls. That's called service. And I think that led to the beginning of the Deltas.
Okay, now. But anyway.
Got to get some attention out of that.
Yes. One thing I remember about this church, it flooded. How much water was in this church after Katrina? Can you show us, sir?
About
here, but it was lower on the front end. In Fellowship Hall, it was even more.
So where were your members having church during the time that the church was down from the flood?
We have properties over there, and that's where we actually started having church. And once we members started cleaning up, we went to the fellowship hall, and that's where we actually had service till we renovated the whole sanctuary.
How long did it take you to get the doors of the church back open after Katrina in 2005?
You remember? I would say 5 to maybe 08, somewhere in there.
Okay, so just about 3 years
Ma-
or so? That's amazing.
Matter of fact, I'm a transplant. I live with my parents on the other side of the lake in Tangipahoa Parish, and I used to commute because being a member and an official and an officer, we had to maintain the status of our church. So we just did what we had to do. I commuted every Sunday.
Thank you. And in closing, I want to thank you again for coming. Thank you, Dr. Slaughter. Thank you to the Louisiana Prince Hall Masons.
I appreciate you. I would be remiss. My wife sent me a text, remind me, don't miss an opportunity. We have come a long way. Last year in June, we were able to work out a relationship with the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., which was a place that our people built, but could not go to worship. That's the place they buried the senators, the presidents, everybody. Last year, we had a televised program, the Prince Hall Masons, in that church to celebrate Juneteenth, the first annual celebration of the federal holiday. We will go back there this year on a Sunday. Our speaker was Reverend Senator Warnock. And we have pictures of that blew that church away. And so we're planning on going back, but we thought it was significant in a place that we could never go in for them to give us the whole church, and we packed that church in celebration of the first annual Juneteenth. All right, thank you.